So welcome again to our fourth session of our Amplify Voices, the Global Majority series, which is focusing on food and environmental justice. And my name is Miles Newton, so I'll be here continuing as your host. And my co-pilot, Jessica Duravaj, joining our journey throughout this entire week. And so today we have to welcome Dr. Nazirahk Amen, who will be giving a presentation on exploring the concept of an expanded Holobiont and non-dualistic approach to regenerative agriculture as a path towards a healthier humanity. And so, as you know, we're continuing to join forces with change makers around the globe who are working to dismantle inequity, mitigate harm, prioritize collective wellness, steward the planet, and stressing interdependent liberation along the way. And so throughout the history, Voices of the Global Majority, Black, Indigenous people of color have been at the forefront of breaking down barriers of systemic issues that affect both the planet and humanity while ushering in radical change. And whether it has been bringing yoga to the West or fighting injustice on the front lines of society, and they are bringing about and ushering in radical changes along the way. And now is a time that's requiring us to continue to listen and heal those historical wounds and to keep doing something that's different. And so we enter into this work and these sessions as a way and an act of community care, because none of us can be well unless all of us are well. So again, welcome. And we're inspired to keep sharing the space with all of you. And we would also like to take a moment just to honor that we're virtually located and being able to join together because of the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts and the unceded lands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans that we are joining from. And beyond and on behalf of Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, we'd like to invite you to share with us in the chat the lands that you are joining us from and the indigenous inhabitants that stewarded those lands. And in terms of stewardship, we'd also like to say that we, as a nonprofit educational organization that's been dedicated to empowering people and communities to realize their full potential through the transformative wisdom and practice of yoga, are able to bring this Amplify Voices of the Global Majority series to you because of our generous gifts of our donors. And so we'd like to thank them again and to thank all of you for your presence with us today. And so as part of this collective space, we'd also like to bring into this space our online community agreements. So we're going to post those in the chat for everyone to peruse for a moment. And just know that by being here in the space with us, you are acknowledging and opting into those, and that we thank you for doing so and keeping the space collective and open. And so let us just take a few breaths before we kind of dive into this wonderful presentation. So if you'll take just a nice, long, slow inhale through the nose and a gentle exhale out through the mouth. And do 2 more of those at your own pace. And when you let out that last one, you can kind of return and we may begin.
Thank you, Miles. Welcome again, everyone. It's so great to see you all. So great to see some familiar faces that we have been on this journey with over the last couple of days. And we welcome anyone that is new to the Amplify Summit. It is our sincere pleasure and honor to introduce to you Dr. Nazirahk Amen. Nazirahk Amen is a naturopathic doctor, Chinese medicine practitioner, peri-urban farmer, and entrepreneur. As a natural health practitioner, he practices the Hippocratic view of food as medicine. He has been practicing for 24 years at Wisdom Path Healing Center in Tacoma Park, Maryland. He is the owner and operator of Purple Mountain Organics, which offers quality tools, organic farm supplies, and custom farming services. And Purple Mountain Grown, a peri-urban farming operation that specializes in small grains and dry beans at local farmers markets. Miles and I are here to support you as always during the presentation. Offline, you can email online support at kripalu.org or feel free to DM us in the chat if there's anything that you need. Towards the end of the program, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And so without further ado, it is our honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Nazirahk Amin.
Greetings, everyone. Peace. Thank you for having me. I want to thank Kripalu for this opportunity. And yes, so the topic that we want to speak to today, expanding the concept of a holobiont, a non-dualistic approach to regenerative agriculture as a path towards a healthier humanity. So in the lead up to this, I was quoted as saying that we are all unique rays of consciousness interacting with stardust and microbes. And so today, just to give you a background, my goal is to, one, explore the root causes of the current chronic disease epidemic and the pending ecosystem collapses that we are looking at, delve into the symbiotic relationships that exist in and as nature, and take a quantum leap towards optimal health on a human scale and on an ecosystem scale. So I'm going to go through a history of modern agriculture and the modern conventional medical system, along with organic agriculture and I guess what we would consider complementary and alternative medicine today, its roots and understanding of the impacts of all of these systems on our ecosystem and human health, and an understanding of how soil, animal, and human microbiomes are interrelated. The core philosophies that I practice are naturopathic medicine, Chinese medicine. I'm a homeopathic doctor. And through my years, I've struggled to combine or in a cohesive way for myself how the medicine that I do with patient is linked to the health of our soils and how to apply that in an agricultural setting. So a biome is simply I had to demystify the topic of my own talk. So a biome is simply a unit of living matter. This definition of a holobiont, it's a holobiont perspective is crucial to capture within a single explanatory unit the important niche construction processes occurring at these different levels and between multiple species. And in order to decipher that one, I had to look at the word niche. So niche, the definition of niche is a habitat supplying the factors necessary for the existence of an organism or a species, or the ecological role of an organism in a community, especially in regard to food consumption. So the concept of a holobiont is similar to the concept of Gaia, which is the earth is a living unit. And I think for humanity, for us, to survive, we really have to start seeing ourselves not just as a part of nature, but to experience ourselves as nature itself. So the human microbiome, there's been a lot of talk about the human microbiome in previous years. Part of understanding the human microbiome, so in the past, people have thought that the human microbiome outnumbered actual human cells by like 10 to 1. In recent history, we understand it's more like I think it's 1.3 to 1. But it still means that there's more microbial cells in our bodies and on our bodies than there actually are human cells. And so that's something to really think about. Most of these cells exist in our gut in terms of where the concentration is, but they're everywhere. The skin is the biggest organ. No matter how much we wash ourselves or rinse ourselves, we have different colonies of microbes living all throughout and in our bodies. And they control crucial functions for our bodies. So I want to link that because just in terms of, and they also connect us to our surroundings. So when we think about the microbiome and what it means, what regenerative agriculture means, regenerative agriculture is really, for me, I've been an organic farmer, and I guess the term regenerative has been used for many, many years. But for me, it means moving from an organic chemistry-based concept of farming, such as using nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as our main considerations for how to amend the soil, to thinking about life in the soil and moving towards the concept of feeding the life in the soil and the life in the soil, creating a healthy environment and feeding the plants in a healthy way. And so there's many models that relate to regenerative agriculture. If you look up the term, this comes from the National Resources Defense Council as a definition. So, but the term is used quite a bit. And for me, it's really about building the soil so that we can build human health. So my practice, Wisdom Path Healing Center, I'm in Tacoma Park, Maryland, in the DC Beltway. And I graduated from a school called Bastyr Naturopathic College back in 1998, and I've been practicing in this area since then. Bastyr is noted as being, I guess, one of the foremost alternative medicine schools that have sort of a science-based understanding. And in my practice, I tend to focus more on energy medicine. Well, when we go to naturopathic school, we're introduced to many different modalities, and we sort of have to choose how we focus our energy. And so I guess you could say my practice is a general family medicine practice, because I've treated patients from preconception, working with people with infertility issues, all the way to transitioning out of this world in healthy ways. Inherent to my practice is the understanding that as humans, we are spiritual beings, have an earthly experience, and the role that I play as a practitioner is in easing the suffering that patients present with, while helping them grow through and from their experiences. I think that we are meant to get lessons, and disease is one of the primary ways that we get lessons. Unfortunately, it seems like one of the leading impetuses for growth is suffering, and disease is part of that process. But from that, if people can grow and learn to open and close different chapters in their lives, then I think I judge that as success in helping people. What I find consistently with working with people is that, when we're really sick, we feel isolated. Even though we might be surrounded by lots of people, and when we're really healthy, patients tend to have a sense of interconnectedness, not just with other humans, but with their surroundings, and the choices that they begin to make reflect that. So the other side of, I guess, the business world that I live in, I initially started Purple Mountain Organics as a way to sort of not have to see patients all the time. And so in the beginning of my practice, At one point, I probably saw 50 or 60 people a week, which is a lot for a naturopathic doctor. I usually spend about an hour with each patient. And so whether it's acupuncture or homeopathy or whatever, my visits are an hour long. And so the beauty of naturopathic medicine is that we really get to know the people that we work with. And at the same time, we are constantly hearing as doctors the worst parts of people's lives. So farming for me has been grounding. It's been a way to connect with nature. It's been a way to regenerate myself so that I can be more useful. And it also connects me to the cycles of nature. So as I said, my organic farming has really gone from, I guess, a backyard sustenance farming to a large enterprise. We grow about 20 acres of a very mixed operation, from vegetables to grains and beans. So you can see here one of our fields. Our emphasis has definitely been started with a whole house sort of sustenance farming, trying to grow all the food that we could grow for ourselves as vegetarians. So when we were doing it mostly in our yards years ago, that meant that we would eat a lot of carrots and sweet potatoes through the wintertime. And so the beauty of growing grains. So in front of you, you see in the forefront, one of our dryland rice production fields. The first part there is the rice field. In the background, you see some corn, and behind that, we have about 3 or 4 acres of dry beans in production. And then there's also a vegetable plot. So our plots are very diversified. People once commented that, we still use monocultures, but really we're using diversified farming that incorporates carbon farming with the grains and the cover crops. Our cover cropping has moved from just weed suppression and maximizing organic matter to using multi-species cover crops that emphasize biodiversity and nutrient cycling. And maximizing the microbial levels on the farm. So at market here, you see one of our setups. We market a couple farmers markets. One is the local Tacoma Park Farmers Market. Another one is DuPont Circle in downtown DC. You see there about 10 different varieties of beans. We do like a hulless oatmeal. We do 3 or 4 types of hard wheats, soft wheats, barleys, buckwheats. I think that grains have gotten a bad rap in the sort of no carb movement. For one, I think we have the way that we grow grains using nitrogen and phosphorus-based fertilizers, along with some of the glyphosate and different chemicals that are used in the production, have sort of lessened the nutrient content of grains, along with we've lost the traditional methods of preparing grains. We've moved away from fermentation processes like making sourdough and using grains in a way that people have used for centuries that have made them healthy for them, and other sort of fermentative processes that we use with not just grains, but different vegetables. I think that we should definitely pay attention to how different foods have been used by the indigenous peoples over many centuries. So that's our farm production, some of it. So this is a picture of my daughter many years ago. I want you to pay attention to that nice ring around her mouth. That is, she started off getting her microbiome from her mother through breastfeeding, but she picked up a lot right in our backyard. This is right after she ate a tomato. that was probably on the ground. And so she really developed a really nice microbiome. I think that many of the ways that children are sort of grow up isolated from nature is part of what ails us today. And so it's been beautiful to be able to have my family experience this sort of farming journey with us. I think it's crucial that, and I also think that the farmers of the future are going to come from the children of today. And many of them will come from inner city because they have the understanding, because a lot of the old techniques that we're using, I think, will be sort of phased out. And they incentivized by the sort of the core philosophy of understanding the value of growing food. So my daughter today, I had to make up for her with this picture because she turned into a beautiful, flowered into a beautiful young lady. And she's has some flower farming potential in her. I think that's part of her future. And I definitely encourage her in that. And so, so this is me. Back in, about 1976. Or it might have been a little bit before that, but I grew up down on the bayou in Louisiana. And so I guess to be in accord with the information here, the town I grew up with is called Opelousas. And Opelousas is in the Mississippi Delta. It was the home of the Attapaka tribe, or Attakaapa tribe, but it was the Appaloosa band of the Attakaapa tribe. And so I grew up in an area where topsoil was 3 feet deep. It's a very fertile land. And I guess my family, from the beginning, even when we lived in the one of the poorest neighborhoods in the town, we were still urban homesteaders. My grandparents had chickens in their yard and a really big garden. We kept pigs in our backyard. We always, if we wanted to sort of eat sweets, we had to go out and pick the figs and pick the blackberries, and we frequently, picked the pecan trees. So we were always sort of in connection with nature. My parents, they had a mission to get us out of the city and into the country. So my family, we were around the age of 12, we moved out to my father's family land. So of his brothers and sisters, we moved back into the land that he was raised on. Actually, the house that we built was on the site of my grandfather and his brother's sugarcane mill. It's been beautiful just to understand like some of that family history and what your ancestors actually did. But it was definitely a level of sustenance living. And, we also supported ourselves by hunting, by fishing. This was sort of the lifestyle that I grew up with. And I guess in moving to the cities, immediately, so I did my undergrad at Xavier University in New Orleans. And one of the first things I noticed when I moved into the city was that the people who lived in cities did not have a clue as to where their food came from. And so it became very clear to me early on, like people didn't understand, have a connection with their food supply. So this is the rest of the family, standing in front of a beautiful multi-species cover crop. So the concept of food is medicine. And what I guess all food is not medicine. One of the main things that we do in natural medicine is we, as a doctor, I go over everything that a patient intakes into their system, because unfortunately, while food can be medicine, a lot of food is not medicine. And so we want to know everything about patients. We do food histories and diet diaries, and we go over them. And food can be one of the biggest sort of obstacles to cure. So when we talk about people healing and the unfolding of optimal health, those are things that we need to explore. Why people crave certain foods, what lifestyle they may be living that keeps them hooked on fast foods and unable to cook their foods. Sometimes these are discussions that you have to have with people in order to help them take a step back and just look at like how they're living their lives and how that's not consistent with what might be healthy for them. So in this concept of food as medicine, one of the things that we look at is or has come up as a farmer is, how do we really measure nutrient density in foods, right? And so we use tools like a sort of a spectrometer here. We use refractometers, Brix meters. All these things sort of give us an understanding of what the nutrient content is in food. And this is not really a new concept. Back in the early 1900s, there was a man, a doctor, a dentist named Weston Price. And he traveled all over the world and found that across many of the diets and cultures, those who ate their sort of indigenous diets had strong teeth and good health, and many of them lived really long lives. So what he took note of was that in areas where the soils had been depleted, there was illness that was inherent to those areas, and also where people were healthy on their indigenous diets and through their concept of progress had started to eat a Western diet of processed foods, they began to lose their health in just a few years, and that was consistent. And so while I don't really agree with some of the recommendations of his foundation, I do take note of his findings and really understand that at the core of our illness, the demineralization of our soils is inherent to a disease population. And so we can talk about the processing of foods, but really from an agricultural perspective, the way that we're growing foods using nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as the key minerals, and this nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium coming from a sort of chemical processes is at the heart of the nutrients being depleted from our soils. So I would, take note, a couple of people, organizations that work on measuring food nutrient density and what it is. The Bionutrient Food Association is led by Dan Kittredge in the Northeast. He grew up on an organic farm and was led to research nutrient density, and he's working on a tool called the bionutrient meter, which is very similar to one of the tools, the spectrometer here, in terms of having a consumer actually go to the grocery store and be able to look at a food and see exactly how many nutrients are in the food. So this is the refractometer in use. This was actually a very out of season but very sweet watermelon that we had a few nights ago when it was 80 degrees here. The Brix reading on that is 13, which was the highest reading possible for on the meter. And the watermelon was really sweet. So it's a measure of dissolved solids. So it doesn't mean, you know, some people ask, how do you know that because something is sweeter means it has more nutrients? But the measure of dissolved solids is not just about sweetness. It's also about the phytochemicals and the other nutrients that are available in the plants. This is the same bricks using the sciometer that was there, which is infrared refractometer. And so that one was equal to the first reading. If you look down, you see the number 13, but 12.5. So at the center of the watermelon, the reading was 13, and on the edges near the rind, the center, the reading was about a 10. All of those are still really good readings. So one of the things that we do to sort of address nutrient density is, you know, adding things like volcanic rock dust and different minerals to the soil, amending, adding, using things like biochar. What are some of the other biochar? I think right there, I think I'm trying to think of the leonardite, which is another humic substance that we add. All of this is geared towards remineralizing the soils and facilitating life in the soil. How to bring life back to the soil. So I want to go from here into a little history about medicine. And so if we look back at the 19th century and what was happening with medicine, there was definitely remnants of folk medicine, indigenous medicine, mixed in with, you know, I guess there was one of the main things that people did was the use of leeches. Within even the conventional system, leeches, the sale of leeches reached its peak in the mid 1800s. Heavy metals like mercury and lead were commonly used. And towards the end of the century, things tended to change. Actually, at the end of the 17th century or the 18th century, we started to discover things like vaccines. At the middle of the 19th century, the discovery of ether and different surgical techniques led to some, but really there was sort of a mix, and there was no standard for medical education that was apparent. So what I want to bring to your attention, these two folk, which J.P. Rockefeller or J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller. And so what do these people have in common with these folks, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk? I think, you know, it's depending on how we look at it, they're definitely influencers because of their financial situation. At the beginning of the 20th century, the John D. Rockefeller Institute was founded, and the president of that institute was a doctor named Dr. Flexner. So Dr. Flexner had a brother who was an educator, and that educator was hired by J.P. Morgan. And in 1910, he published the Flexner Report. And so the Flexner Report actually changed the landscape of medicine in the US. And some would argue for the better. I think having a standardized medical education is a good thing in terms of the way that our schools are set up. I think what happened was they sort of threw out a lot of good stuff with some of the bad stuff. So what Flexner did was recommend that everyone change all the schools change their medical education to a standard that was set by Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, which was based on a German scientific model. And they also limited funding for medical schools based on changing to that model. So all of the alternative medical schools were effectively demonized and abandoned. And so some would say there was actually a medical coup that happened. So the Flexner report of 1910 did a lot of damage to traditional medicines, indigenous medicines, that lasted probably 100 years. So in the wave of the reforms that followed the Flexner report, we went from 148 medical schools down to about 66 medical schools. So the understanding of conventional medicine is that, anatomy, physiology, biology, and chemistry are all used using the scientific method. Pathology is measurable and diseases are identified by a competent diagnostician. Diseases are treated and eliminated. The appropriate treatment is determined using evidence-based application of pharmaceuticals, surgeries, and other interventions. And the standard of care is largely determined by research from universities and industry. And normal human nutrition is not really of primary concern. And there's also within that paradigm a pledge to make war on different diseases, and some would argue on different aspects of nature. So I have a younger sister who's actually a PharmD. She's a doctor of pharmacy. And I was visiting her, and she was doing some graphs, and I asked her to explain some of the work that she does. And so this graph shows that in the US, the top traditional drugs, which are drugs prescribed by doctors through pharmacies, that 40% of the spending on these drugs goes to diabetes. And those drugs represent 50% of the overall spending on drugs, but are sort of 98% of the drugs prescribed. The other 2% of drugs, which constitute the other 50% of spending, are the specialty therapeutic drugs. And of those, the drugs like Ozempic and these ultra sort of high price pharmaceuticals that are, hundreds of dollars per pill and thousands per prescription, the main category those are used to treat are inflammatory diseases. So they represent over 50% of the spending. So part of the focus, why I bring this up is because part of the focus of my talk is how chronic metabolic disease and chronic inflammatory diseases, which are two of the most prevalent categories of diseases, are really being generated through our dietary choices. So I want everyone to keep that in mind. So our healthcare system, while the pros of it is that they have eliminated a lot of infectious diseases. They're experts in surgery. If you get in a car accident, you don't want to come to see me. You want to go to the ER and go through whatever processes you need there. And so even some of the primary drugs that are used are suppressive in nature, but they are necessary and life-saving in many situations. So in the American healthcare system, we spend more money than any other country on healthcare. It does not reflect the quality of care because we stand at number 11 among the highest income nations in terms of care, and number 37 worldwide in terms of quality of care. That's according to the World Health Organization in 2000. Chronic diseases are at epidemic proportions, and every year over 100,000 people are transitioned out of here due to interacting with the medical system. So Dr. Flexner, at the end of his career, sort of lamented that science, in the very act of solving problems, creates more problems. So I want to transition a little bit more to the history of conventional farming. So, and in order to do that, I want to point out that, when Columbus came to America, it was already fully inhabited. And I know others on this series have talked about that. But what Europeans encountered where they came here were thriving and abundant ecosystems that were based on hundreds and thousands of permaculture systems, and that were not recognized for what they were, from the fisheries that were along the coast to the way that the buffalo grazed the Midwest. All of those were actively cultivated by people. So when Columbus come here, the first Europeans came, they brought smallpox, and they came 10 years later after the population had pretty much been wiped out. And so they looked at it sort of as just what nature did, and it was anything but that. And so in many cases of the early European settlements, their survival depended on some level of cooperation with the indigenous peoples. And in terms of early slavery, a lot of European survival depended on African knowledge of agricultural systems. And so Europeans were experiencing many of the same symptoms of ecological collapse in Europe in the 1400s, from deforestation, from overuse of soils and polluted soils, waters that had to do with overusing the soils. So in many cases, they were forced to leave Europe. It was not a choice. And in many cases for Africans, I think, our people of African descent, one of the things that we need to understand, that many Africans, when you go down to the rice fields of South Carolina was the richest state in the nation during slavery, and it was largely due to the knowledge that was stolen from Africa, because they stole the people. They went along the coast of West Africa and saw the beautiful systems of rice production that they had, and took those people and brought them to South Carolina. And they reproduced the systems that they had done in Africa in South Carolina. And so that puts a much different light on slavery than just thinking that we were forced into a situation as just sort of people who didn't have any skills. And so by the turn of the 18th century, coming into the 18th century, a lot of the East Coast had sort of been cultivated for 100 years, right? And so many of the ways that we cultivated had depleted the soils. And so in America, I think the discovery of the Chilean and Peruvian guano heaps in the early 1800s, those heaps were actually imported. When people put that guano on their fields, it had amazing results. And so, interestingly, this information comes from a Quaker farmer that I farm with. So we do peri-urban farming, which means we live in the city and we farm in a few different spots around the different counties around DC. One of the farmers was a Quaker. The Quakers are known for having released their slaves, I think, by 1815. And so, but the soils were also depleted by then. And so what this shows is that before nitrogen fertilizers were found, a guano was being imported. So the CNO canal and the different ways that we systems that are around DC, where they brought in guano, and they figured out how to move the guano further inland. But one of the first sort of reliefs that we had was from the use of guano in agriculture. And so in 1909, so the Flexner Report happened in 1909. In 1909, there was some German scientists, Haber and Bosch, who developed a way to take atmospheric nitrogen into and turn it into ammonia. And so this nitrogen is the key component of fertilizer and is used to promote growth and increase crop yields. It's used for food preservation. There's a lot of medical applications for nitrogen, but it's also the biggest chemical for warfare. So it represents, along with phosphorus, is also used for warfare, but it represents the sort of the core of what we consider to be the Green Revolution, was replacing soil fertility with chemicals, nitrogen and phosphorus, which we now know are soluble nutrients. I am a nutrient management consultant for the state of Maryland, which most of the nutrient management programs the concern is the pollution of the Chesapeake Bay because of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers that are leaking into the Chesapeake Bay from farmland all throughout the Northeast. And so, about 30 to 50% of nitrogen is actually taken up by the plants. A lot of it is released into the atmosphere in terms of nitrous oxide, which is one of the most noxious global heating gases. And then you can look at what's going on in our oceans and lakes down in the Gulf of Mexico, having one of the biggest sort of dead spots in the world, right outside of the Mississippi River. So understanding the conventional farming, it's almost a repeat of what happens in natural medicine, in that understanding of anatomy, physiology, chemistry, pathology is determined by scientists in the lab. Appropriate treatments are using evidence-based biological methods, and human health has little to do with food production. So it's sort of a repeat. This is big ag. This is commodity cropping. So it's growing food for money. So the cons are soil degradation, destruction of the soil biology through tillage, through the use of fertilizers and the use of glyphosate or herbicides, soil demineralization, overriding deficiencies through the use of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium fertilizers. So what we end up with is fat food that looks really good. When we go into the grocery store and we look at those fruit and those vegetables, they look great, but they lack nutrients. And so how do we bring the nutrients back to the land and replenish those nutrients in the stores? The difference between conventional foods and organic foods is conventional foods, organic foods tend to be higher in vitamins and minerals, and also higher in phytonutrients. And I'm going to talk about why that is important. So of course, genetic disturbances, this genetic engineering that they're doing with the plants is going to have repercussions for centuries to come. Extractionary processes, eventually they just came up with this big article about phosphorus running out for ag. I think the last big store is somewhere in the Sahara, and they're trying to figure out how to equally distribute it to both rich and poor countries. So there's a lot of things that we need to figure out if we're going to continue down the road that we're on. And so here's where the Elon Musk and the Jeff Bezos come in, because I think their history, their idea of life on Mars is not compatible with these human bodies that we are living in. These are Earth bodies. These are not Martian bodies. Our experience, our microbiome comes from the planet Earth. So there is, from this, I want to sort of correlate the organic movement. So around the same time at the turn of the 20th century, Sir Albert Howard was a British scientist that first started his career in the Caribbean, and then he moved to India, and he studied organic system. He is the father of organic agriculture, along with people like Rudolf Steiner, who's the father of biodynamic farming, and Eve Balfour, who did the Hawley experience, which is like a long-term experiment that sort of compared organic to conventional side by side. That experiment lasts from like 1939 to 1974. She is considered the mother of the English organic movement. J.R. Rodale of the Rodale Institute here is the founder of the organic movement for the US, which their main emphasis was really adding organic matter to the soil. And so, but there's another doctor, Dr. John Albright, who he looked at how foods were affecting the foods that soldiers ate who signed up for the war. And he could tell from the county that they grew up in, sort of what the foods were, and looked at when they subscribed what their medical deficiencies were. He was able to go back and see where people had depleted the soil. So, but his emphasis was adding organic matter, but it was also with mineral balancing, using mineral balancing as a key to soil health, and the emphasis being on soil health as the key to good animal health and human health. And so a lot of people are coming back to what Dr. Albright was talking, 50 years ago. He kind of got overridden by the nitrogen and phosphorus industries. And so when it comes to medicine, I sort of want to point out that, there should only be one medicine. Patients come in here, and a lot of times people come to see me and they feel like they're sort of playing with a different paradigm, right? And so they're kind of caught in between two worlds, especially when they're sick. So my goal is always to educate people, educate them about what I do, but also educate them as to what happens to them in the conventional world. And through that education, allow them to make healthy choices for them based on where they are in their life. I don't think there's only one way for anything. I think there's a lot of good in conventional medicine, and there's definitely a lot of good in natural therapies. Conventional medicine fails when it comes to chronic disease and inflammation. So natural medicine and lifestyle change have a lot to offer. So the 6 principles at the core of naturopathic medicine are: first, do no harm, which is using the least harmful therapies, identify and treat the cause, working with the healing power of nature, using the doctor as teacher, the role of the doctor as teacher, treating the whole person, so taking into account all of the dimensions of who we are as humans, and prevention. And that's where food comes in. So that's sort of the core of the naturopathic principles. And within naturopathy, you have vitalistic naturopathic medicine, which is really the heart of naturopathic medicine. So in that, the universal spiritual principle as above, so below. The universe is ordered by immutable principles. The same dynamics that order the universe are at work in the human body. That health is a natural state of humanity, and disease is an adaptive response to disturbances in the field. that the correction of the disturbance should result in the restoration of health, and that in extreme circumstances, for me as a doctor, I'm always willing to help educate people. And I also need to understand the limitations of what I do. And sometimes I suggest things to people that they may not have even considered themselves in terms of conventional therapy when it comes to life over death. So people need to be open, I believe, and use the best of sort of both worlds. And hopefully we get to a point where there's no both worlds anymore. So this is interesting because this man is Samuel Hahnemann, who is the founder of homeopathy. Dr. Hahnemann is the only doctor that has a monument in downtown DC given to just him. So this is a picture of that monument. And so one would ask why a quack, as we now consider homeopathy as pure quackery in the conventional world, has a monument named or presented after him. And the answer is homeopathy played such a significant role in human health in America in the 19th century that President McKinley at the time put up this monument in honor of him. Many of the hospitals, like Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, these were all homeopathic hospitals. Homeopathy sort of helped bring medicine into modernity, in that the cruel treatments that used to happen to patients in mental institutes, he taught them to be gentle. There were so many homeopathic schools that existed. And so one of the downsides of the Flexner report is that because we did not understand homeopathy, it was phased out. And so even myself, when I first went to naturopathic school, I think homeopathy was the second year of our schooling. And so I slept through 3/4 of homeopathy because I was like, how are we going to give somebody something that is nothing and expect them to actually get better from that? And so the core, and then when I was studying for the final for homeopathy, I was reading through one of the homeopathic remedies, and I took that remedy, and it completely changed my life. And that remedy brought me my energy into the present moment, which is something that, when we think about techniques like meditation, and my meditation was always about trying to get somewhere, right? I want to reach enlightenment, and when I get there, and so homeopathy brought peace and contentment, and it ended a lot of patterns. And it brought me to understand that if I left the planet, that I was okay with who I am and the life that I lead. And so I live my life from the heart. And I think, homeopathy gets rid of our compulsions, right? So sometimes we change and we shift, and we're still full of compulsions based on the instinctual skills that we get from what I call living in the ghetto. And the ghetto is not just in inner cities. I think the ghetto exists for everyone, because the ghetto is the place where we feel like we're alone and our survival depends on us tapping into some core instinctual techniques just to get by. And I don't think that's a healthy place for anyone to live. I think feeling connected, feeling in community, that's a healthier place to live. So getting back to homeopathy, the core of homeopathy is like cures like. It's based on vibrational medicine. It's based on quantum biology and quantum physics. I want to quote one of Hahnemann's fiercest critics, came from the AMA. And this doctor, his name was Morris Fishbein. He was the executive director of the AMA. He said that the influence of Hahnemann was on the whole certainly for the good. He emphasized the individualization of the patient and the handling of the disease, and he demonstrated the value of testing and actual virtues of a drug by trial. So the way I look at homeopathy and how I use homeopathy in my practice is this: understanding disease is a posture. It is us, a maladaptive, multidimensional posture that in which we get stuck in time, in a space, and it's not a good space because that space exists in duality, right? So in this case, if any of us, go out to a jungle and we decide we're going to go on a safari, and the next thing we know, we look up and we're being chased by a lion, and we know that the healthy response in that situation is to get away. And once we get away, we make it back to our the comfort of our homes. And maybe in the next few days, we're walking down the street and the neighbor's dog or cat comes out, and we find ourselves running or caught up in a tree somewhere, and the neighbor stopped us and asked, "Hey, what's going on with you?" Right? We would probably say, we'd start explaining what happened to us in this chase, right? And write it off as sort of a PTSD. And so maybe this person, 10 years later, they're in a meeting and their boss starts to yell or their spouse starts to yell, and they have the same exact reaction as they did in the jungle, right? And so they say, maybe I'll go to counseling or go to therapy and try to deal with this. But at no point probably will it come up to them that they will say, like, how do you feel? And they will say, I feel like I'm being chased by a wild lion, right? And so homeopathy is us being stuck in some experience that took a lot of survival energy to get through. And then sort of it affects our energy so much that we use that to engage, to determine how we engage in duality. And so in this particular case, the remedy that's needed is a plant remedy that comes from the Solanaceae family called stramonium. Stramonium is a well-known remedy within homeopathy. The Solanaceae family is a somewhat poisonous family, even though it does include things like tomatoes and peppers. Stramonium and belladonna are some of the more poisonous members of the family. But in general, plant remedies, the way that I look at it when people come in, the core of what someone is saying is that their issue is about sensitivity and reactivity. And so they express in terms of how things affect me, what I'm sensitive to, what I react to. The problem is not usually taken personal, but the action or the sensitivity is. So if they say, I don't like my husband or I don't like my boss, they're not talking in personal terms. They may say my husband screams or my boss yells. And in another aspect, they would be sensitive to things like, oh, my arthritis is worse when it gets damp. It's worse when it gets cold. It's worse from the east, from the heat. And so if you think of a plant has to live out and determine its survival mechanism from one place. And so it's secreting all kinds of communications with its neighbors. It has different techniques to keep the bugs and the animals from eating it. All of this goes into the survival of plants, and they need to be very sensitive in order to sort of survive in their environments in a healthy way. The issue is, though, in this case, this child who's being chased by a lion is not a plant. She is not stramonium. The stramonium just represents a sort of an artificial state. If any one of us ate stramonium as a plant, it would create this sort of feeling in us. So this is a case of an animal remedy, Formica rufa, which is the red ant. So I had a patient who came to me who had sarcoidotic arthritis, which includes very severe burning of her joints. Usually there was a 2-week to 1-month progression of each joint that would progress from a redness and a swelling into a deformity. And so that pain usually wandered. And so the situation of this lady was that she was actually a human resources lawyer for a big corporation, and she was in charge of firing people. So every now and then she would get these sort of charts, these files handed to her, and it would be like, you know, we want you to work up this file and figure out how to get these people out of here. And usually those people had worked there, you know, more than 15 years, and they were trying to get rid of them before their retirements. And so that really affected her, because after a while, some of those charts included people that she had lunch with and ate with and were her friends, right? And so it's interesting how this would show up as an autoimmune disease, as the body sort of fighting itself. So the core of a remedy in the animal kingdom is survival of the fittest. It's usually the way that people perceive what's happening to them is that it's me versus the other. So something is happening to me, a victim in an aggressor type relationship. They stab me in the back, they kick me in the groin. And so an ultimate consequence is that if I cannot keep up, I will be isolated and I will be pushed to the periphery. So there is that sense of isolation in an animal way, in the way of the remedy presented here, Formicorufa. It's an insect, so it's always something bigger than me that can crush me, that can smash me, that can take me out. And so I am not strong enough to fight against this. So I have to live in this sort of victim oppressor relationship. And the ways that I fight back in the case of ants is that they bite you, they burn you. And so one of the concepts in homeopathy is that there's only us in the universe, which means that whatever I perceive is happening to me is happening from me, because there's only us. And so we'll discuss that a little bit more. But all right, so we move here to minerals. So the concept of a mineral remedy, it's always about structure. The minerals are the stardust, right? Stardust, these are the elements that were created through nuclear fusion in the core of stars. Fusion involved the colliding and the merging of atomic nuclei, which were generating the energy that created elements that were heavier. And when all those supernova sort of exploded, they sent all this energy out into the universe. And so the periodic table represents the elements that landed on this planet. And so, and they represent the core of what our bodies are made of and what everything around us is made of. So the case of a remedy such as like salt, which would be sodium mixed in with a chloride. So sodium is by itself incomplete. So it's looking for a bond, and chloride is also incomplete and looking to bond to something. So the classic case of someone who might need natrium muriaticum for a remedy, it's usually a situation or can be a situation of grief, and that I feel incomplete. I'm looking to bond to something. The thing that I bonded to burned me. And so now I'm still incomplete and I want to bond to something, but the thing I bonded to burned me. So there's this sort of contradictory state of wanting to be isolated, but then wanting to connect to something. And so this is a common story when we feel betrayed in relationships, and a common feeling. So this is one of the common homeopathic remedies that are used. And so we look at the periodic table in terms of, you know, how these substances, their own survival. People wonder, like, what do you mean the survival of a mineral, right? But minerals freeze. They have ways that they exist in certain ways, and they change from both freezing and from being melted, right? So these are the different survival mechanisms that minerals use to adjust to the environments that they're in. So usually mineral remedies, though, the issue is about structure. So the difference is when something happens to them, they question their structure. So if they're attacked, it's because my structure is weak, right? If my structure would hold up, I would be able to support myself, which would allow me to go to work and support my family, right? So, but the way that they perceive the world is through structure. So homeopathy has been explained now using quantum electrodynamics. And so instead of us looking at homeopathy as backwards and something that is not scientific, because that is the argument, the FDA is actually constantly trying to get rid of homeopathy. Homeopathy is the only medicine that is regulated by the FDA as a drug. Supplements are not regulated as drugs. They're under the category of food, but homeopathic remedies are regulated as drugs. And there is a constant campaign to get rid of something. So my question is, if that something is nothing and we're just using placebo medicine, then how is that harmful, right? And so I question that. So Dr. Bastyr, who was Bastyr University, he was one of the old school naturopaths who held up during the 20th century, and who Bastyr University was named after. Bastyr, being the scientific university that they are, was warned by him that keep on with this scientific research, but please don't lose the philosophy. Don't lose the heart of natural medicine. And so in their quest to be scientific. So what is scientific research? When we look at randomized controlled trials, which are the gold standard using double-blind studies, treatments with controlled environments and controlled variables, this research measures efficacy. I suggest that we move more to a model that involves outcomes-based research. This measures the effects of interventions, taking many variables into consideration that are pertinent to everyday life, such as lifestyle change, along with supplementation and different variables, even drugs, but it's looking at the whole picture. And with that, we get to measure the effectiveness of a therapy using real world environments. If you give me 10 people who have diabetes, I may give them 10 different homeopathic remedies and maybe 4 or 5 different supplement regimens, right? But they will all get better. And so if you looked at it from randomized controlled trials, there will be a lot of holes. But if you look at it from an outcomes-based perspective, it will look very good. So I think that we really need to look at things using an outcomes-based perspective. So I want to bring this to the bigger picture of our interconnectedness, the concept of as above, so below, the microcosm versus the macrocosm. So we are spiritual beings having an earthly experience. This symbol, the symbol of the circumpoint, is one of the oldest symbols in the world. And so this dot in the center reflects the point at which the particle and the wave sort of interact. The wave is turned into the particle in quantum physics. It's where the universe both exists and doesn't exist at the same time. It is the place where we interchange or interact with spirit. It is the core of our being and who we are. And the circle on the outside represents the outer world. And so in past societies, we've had other symbols like the flower of life, which represents our interconnectedness in a very healthy way with the world. So from the center of our being to the outer world, there is a healthy map. Joseph Campbell, who was a great writer and an author and was an expert in comparative mythology and religion, he said that as humans, we've allowed modern living to lead us away from the mythologies that serve us, and that the religio-philosophical world has been taken over by our socio-economic concerns, meaning we let industry drive us in the way that we perceive our existence and our relationship to nature. And so in that process, we have lost our maps that connect us to the source. The flower of life is a symbol of that connection and is found all over the world, from Africa to India, China. It's seen through medieval Europe. This is a symbol that has existed everywhere as a symbol of our connectivity to the natural world. The Fibonacci sequence is a representative of as above, so below. It is a fractile. It is seen throughout nature. So in the Fibonacci sequence, what we see is this relationship, this sort of pattern that exists all throughout nature, where 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 2 = 3, 3 + 5 = 8, 8 + 5 = 13, and so on and so on. So how this is reflected in nature is here we have the artichoke, the heart of the artichoke. It's there in the flowers, in the sunflowers, in the solar system, in a hurricane, in a storm. This is a sea creature, an anemone. This is our fingerprints. This is a microbe. This is another microbe. This is a microbial colony. This is algae. This is a virus. This is coronavirus. And this is human DNA. This is a cross-section of human DNA as seen by an electron microscope. It's a reflection, as above, so below. The microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. We are nature. We are a solar system in the making. So one of the professors that I had at Bastyr University, Dr. Modell, this was a man who, when we walked into his test, he wanted us to understand stuff or physiology from a systems perspective. So as a class, we consistently went into class, like the top score on most of his tests was like a 60. I probably got like a 35. He had to curve all of his tests, but he really emphasized how we should understand things as a system in operation. So that's what I wanted to point out about him. And one of the systems that I've been attracted to in my practice has been Taoism. And so the Tao is an ecosystem. It's sort of a map. It's a cosmology. It's a guide to how we engage duality. So you see on the left, the black, and on the right, the white. The black represents the yin, the white represents the yang. And so here is a healthy sort of engagement of duality. Yin and yang, so night and day, winter and summer, decay and growth, matter and energy, biology and chemistry, feminine versus the masculine, and earth versus heaven. And so yin and yang are oppositional. They're opposed stages of a continuum, and nothing escapes this. So opposition is relative in that nothing is totally yin or yang. You see those dots, one dot of yin in the center of the yang, one dot of yang in the center of the yin. They cannot exist without each other, and yet they oppose each other. But this opposition is dynamic. There's nothing static. Everything is in constant flux and changing. So when we think of stuff like body temperature regulation, it's a constant sort of balance of opposing forces. So yin and yang are interdependent. Everything contains opposite forces, which are mutually exclusive. They can't exist without the other. So day is defined because of night. There's no activity without rest. There's no contraction without expansion. They're mutually consumptive. So when we think of this constant dynamic balance and the types of imbalances that happen, we talk in terms of excess yin or excess yang, or deficiency yin or deficiency yang, and they're intertransformational. So day turns into night, summer shifts into winter, hot shifts to cold. Happiness can lead to unhappiness. So you can go out on the best night of a binge drinking episode and have the best time of your life, but wake up the next day with the worst headache ever, right? So these are all the duality in action. So Chinese medicine says that optimal health happens when there is the free flow of energy through our channels. There are three types of energy that we need to consider. One is our Jing, which is basically our genetics. It's, in terms of seeds or in terms of who we are, it's what we inherit from our predecessors. The environmental energy, Qi, is our living conditions and the quality of the foods that we eat. And the only replenishable source of Qi that we get is when we connect our heart and our minds, when we tap into the center of that circle and understand our unique purpose in life and map out a connection between us and the surface, then we can tap into that present moment consistently. The concept of immortality is not about living in these earthly human bodies forever. It is bringing that source of energy into our daily lives consistently. That is the true concept behind immortality, in that we bring that eternal spark that lives within us into our lives on a daily basis. And the art of being and becoming, we have Wei Qi, which allows us to confront life. It is our immunity. The Yang Qi allows us to interact and move forward and engage in our surroundings. And our Yuan Qi allows us to survive and stay connected with the source. And so that is how we grow. This is about growth. It's about cultivation. It's about us becoming better human beings. When we come here, we are already there. This concept of enlightenment is inherent to who we are. We just need to connect with that. One of my most profound teachers, Jeffrey Ewan, he's an 88th generation Taoist master. He actually lives in the heart of New York City, but he says the curriculum of life is about the transmutation of Jing, which are genetic Qi, into Shen, which is our spirit, through the combustion of Qi. So, which means that we grow through engaging in duality. We grow through engaging our core energy with duality. And so I want to, so here we have a chart of the 5 elements. So I want to go through this quickly. So this is from Chinese medicine. So we have 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and air. And what I want to bring out in all of this, so wood is about growth. It's about the flavor is, the taste is sour. Fire is related to maturity. The taste is bitter. So I want you to think of these tastes in relationship to phytonutrients. So earth is about the harvest, the maturation, and the taste is sweet, which is nurturing. So bitter is cold and draining, sour is astringent. And in metal, we have the concept of death, and the flavor, the taste for that is pungent. And we have in water, rebirth. And so what's important about that is that rebirth does not exist in Western culture. we end with death. And that is the root of most fear, is the concept of death. If we ask any one of us here what we're afraid of the most and we're honest, it is death, right? But the true honesty is there is no death. It is a continuing cycle that includes the process of rebirth. So I want to bring this into rhizophagy. Rhizophagy is a new concept within farming. And so rhizophagy, the rhizophagy cycle was sort of discovered by a scientist at Rutgers named James White. And basically what he is showing us is in the rhizophagy cycle that if you look at the tip of this root hair here, this microbes, the plants are able to ingest microbes through the root tip. They secrete an oxygenated substance which takes the cell wall away from the microbes, and the plants can take up the nutrients that the microbes brought in. And then they take the strand of RNA that's left over from those microbes out through some root hairs, and they can provide that RNA with another cell wall and send it out to get a different nutrient. So, and all of these things are being controlled not just by bacteria, but also by viruses and different fungi. But what it shows is that plant roots have the ability to farm their microbes and get the nutrients that they need from the soil. So the implications of this, so this shows, you can see another root hair, you can see the microbes around there. They're being attracted to the exudate. So half of what we see of plant growth, but half of the energy of plants goes into creating these exudates that they use to farm microbes, right? So when we have healthy soils, we have a very, very healthy microbial environment. And these plants are completely interconnected with their surroundings through this microbial network. And so here you see microbes going in and out of a root tip. This sort of explains microbes emerging from out of the plant and getting their cell wall to go back and look for more nutrients from the plant. And so plant growth promoting rhizobacteria are key to a healthy plant. They help plants with preventing of diseases. They serve as antibiotics. They help destroy toxins. They do all types of things for plants. When we think about the bacteria and the fungi that are associated, they do things like solubilize phosphorus. They turn rocks into usable nutrients for the plants. Potassium. They serve their function of they get nitrogen and iron from the soil. So, and in a healthy space, having that network available is what helps plants maximize their phytohormone production. And so when we look at plant hormones, you have things like gibberellins and salicylic acid and ethylene and abscisic acid. These plant hormones have an effect on humans. They affect human physiology. They affect our gut microbiome. They affect the plant microbiome and the growth of plants. So I want to make this comparison in looking at metabolic diseases. So cytokinin, which is a plant hormone, has a role very much like the hormone glucagon, which is the opposing hormone to insulin in the pancreas, in that it allows us to mobilize stored energy. It promotes the uptake of nutrients from the soil and translocates them from various parts of the plant, and helps with the regulation of cell division and differentiation. Abscisic acid is another plant hormone, and that plant hormone seems the most like insulin in the human body. It regulates carbohydrate metabolism by promoting the storage of carbohydrates and reducing sugars. And they inhibit enzyme activity and helps with the storage of carbs. Gibberellin is the most like our sex hormones of testosterone and estrogen. They have a lot to do with the plant being able to be fertile and have seed germination and stem elongation and plant flowering. So all of these sort of plant hormones have help with the production of phytochemicals and phytonutrients and the carotenoids and the flavonoids and all the phytohormones that interact. So here shows how the plant microbe and the plant microbiome and the human microbiome sort of share in terms of, one of the ones I want to point out is how the root system of plants act just like most of our microbiome occurs in our gut. Most of the microbes found in plants are found in this rhizophagy cycle in the root system of plants. So it's interesting how they relate flowers to what's happening down in the ovaries and the vagina, and how the skin is related to the leaf and stalk of the plants. The lungs and the skin are both eliminative organs in natural medicine. And so it's interesting how they can help with detoxification. So our first microbiome exposure happens when we go through the birth canal, through our mother's birth canal, and from breastfeeding. So this is actually a electron microscopic picture of the microbiome of an infant. This is a stool from an adult, but it represents the microbiome in the gut. And so it's interesting how just like plants create this exudate that is sort of the medium in which the microbes that they interact with in the soil interact with the root systems and provide the nutrients in our large intestine. We secrete an exudate that allows us to interact with microbes in much the same way. When we look at the gut-brain connection, there's something in the large intestine. We start to produce something called short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids, the acetates and the butyrates, and they have a lot to do with the healthy production of serotonin and all of the sort of feel-good hormones, which one would, we live these lives where, we're always on a sort of dopamine rush or looking for a dopamine fix. And so serotonin is sort of the hormone that is opposed to dopamine, and that it represents true energy and a true good feeling without looking for extra energy. So when the gut brain, when we have healthy microbes in our gut and that is working well, this gut brain connection. So the biggest part of our nervous system outside of the brain is in the gut. Interestingly, it has a lot to do with, people talk about the intuition being a gut feeling. There is a lot to be said about that. And there's a lot to be said about when our gut is unhealthy and how that leads to inflammation. And so when we don't take in good foods, we have leaky guts, and leaky gut is the foundation of inflammation and autoimmune disease. So metabolic syndrome and inflammation. So this, interestingly, is a picture of microbes, gut microbes in the human brain. People think of the brain as sort of the blood-brain barrier, and it's a sterile space. How do we find microbes in the healthy human brain? So I want to go through this really quick. Glycogenesis versus glycogenolysis. So we have two hormones that our body secrete. One is insulin, the pancreas secretes. One is insulin, the other one is glucagon. And so most of us know the economy of insulin, right? Insulin is related to sort of eating a big meal, having the sugars from that meal going to our bloodstream. So insulin turns those sugars into glycogen and promotes the fat storage. And usually we secrete insulin for about 2 hours after we eat in this process. So after about 2 hours, we start secreting glucagon, which is the opposing hormone to insulin, and glucagon starts the breakdown of glycogen, known as glycogenolysis. And so we spend another couple hours after we ate, so breaking down glycogen, which is stored in the liver and in the muscles. And so after that, we move to gluconeogenesis, which is when glycogen is depleted and our bodies start to live off of fat. So this whole diet phase, people do all types of things to promote ketosis. So one of the things that I've gotten into in my practice is intermittent fasting, and using intermittent fasting. I recommend all the time that people experience what it is to live off of glucagon, have fats be their primary source of energy, which means eating nutrient-dense food and allowing our bodies to live off of nutrient-dense foods versus this paradigm where we're constantly chasing dopamine. We're constantly looking for energy fixes. We're living off of true energy. And, you know, I want to say one thing in all of this is that for me, my primary source of energy comes from living a life that I love. So this human nutrition is a secondary nutrition. I think when we live the life that we love and we get our energy from source, that is the highest form of energy there is. So here, I want to sort of contrast between what happens with human diabetes and something called subacute ruminal acidosis. So right now we're feeding grains, a lot of grain to many of the animals, and we're feeding ourselves a lot of processed carbs. And so when we eat those processed carbs and a high fat diet, we get type 2 diabetes. So, but in animals, there exists something called, in cows, there exists subacute ruminal acidosis. And so this happens in cows that are fed what they call mixed rations. And so these mixed rations are feeding cows food that they weren't meant to eat, which is a lot of different grains, right? Cows can take some grain, but now we're feeding the maximum amount of grain. So you can have a herd of animals that have subacute ruminal acidosis, which is very similar to human diagnoses, and the farmers don't really feel compelled to do anything about it until 30% of the herds have this. But both of these conditions lead to vascular problems, to heart problems, to kidney disease, and both are related to a lack of phytonutrients in the diet. And so I would question, this is why you want to understand where your food is coming from. I'm going to slip this side. This just talks about how omega-3 fatty acids are being generated, but I do want to talk about the omega-3 fatty acid balance in our bodies, because this has a lot to do with inflammation. So omega-3s, which really come from flax oils, walnuts, chia seeds, and rape seeds, oil, which we can talk about that and the digestibility of that for humans. But the primary source in the ocean is algae oil. And, you know, most of us, or a lot of people, take fish oil and look to fish as their source of omega-3, which I think now we have to be concerned about things like microplastics and heavy metals that are in all of the fish that we eat, because they're all over the oceans, which are polluted. One of the things that I do with my patients is something called the Omega Quant test. And what we found is this is actually a test that determines what your omega-3 levels are in the body. Because in my practice, I find that people with a lot of inflammation and people who have autoimmune diseases consistently have very low levels of omega-3. And this test allows me to look at what people's omega-3 is, and that helps me determine a strategy and helps them to sort of reduce the inflammation in their life. I personally take algae oil. I'm vegetarian, so the algae oil is the oil that the krill and the bottom fish eat, which of course that goes up the food chain. And what the graph showed before is omega-3 oils are actually created in grass food systems when the grass can go through their rhizophagy cycle. So even with things like the grass-fed beef, animals that are raised where the soil is healthy have higher levels of omega-3 than grass-fed beef that's raised in situations where it's not. They don't. So the symptoms that we exist in are sort of an overfed, undernourished, fat, sick, and nearly dead. We're looking at an obesity epidemic, a metabolic syndrome epidemic, which is diabetes, fatty liver disease, cancer, heart disease, hypertension, and dementia, Parkinson's. We have an infertility epidemic, and we have an inflammatory epidemic, which is GI problems, neurodegenerative disease, auto disease, migraines, menstrual cramping, arthritis. And so I think our food system and the inflammatory nature of the foods that we're eating, along with the nutrient less qualities, have a lot to do with this sort of like overfed but undernourished health issues. So Ray Archuleta, who is a retired NRCS man, says that the soil, he is at the forefront of the regenerative agriculture movement. He says that the soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. I would say that when we look at what's happening in conventional agriculture and in general, even within organic agriculture, we have increased yields of less dense nutrient food. So it's less nutrients, less vitamins, less minerals, and less phytochemicals. There's an issue with soluble fertilizers because that shuts down the rhizophagy cycle. There's less nutrients. The plants have less resilience and less immunity. Chemical fertilizer and pesticide use, again, kills the microbiome. It leaches the nutrients, makes them unavailable, and these salts tend to burn the soil. So heavy tillage, the soil aggregates are the homes and the housing for microbes, and a decrease in our organic matter due to the heavy tillage. So my assessment, so our desire, liver stagnation represents us always wanting more than the energy that we have available. So we're always looking for more energy and grabbing. And so this excess hunger that we have, and we have this excess hunger because we're not living a fulfilled life from the heart. And so what we're seeking, we can't really get through food, but we're looking for it through that. And so that is leading to a situation where we're trying to grow. If you think of conventional agriculture and its attempt to or the model of growing of quantity over quality, which is depleting, causing heat, right? The spleen and stomach, internal heat, which depletes the fluids. It's ruining the landscape. It's causing a deficiency. There's no nutrients in the food. So this is sort of a comparative, something I put out there as my thoughts being a Chinese medical practitioner and what's going on with the soil. So my treatment plan for farms is that we, number one, decrease and eliminates the amount of chemicals that we use on the farm, that we stop with all these antimicrobials, that we sort of eliminate the use of plastics, the soluble fertilizers. We get rid of all the harmful tillage. There's modes of tillage. There's a gradient between heavy tillage and light tillage into no-till, and that we all move towards something that's more like a non-chemical no-till that doesn't use a bunch of herbicides to create food. Increasing organic matter through cover crops and multi-species cover crops, remineralizing the soils in whatever way we have at our resources, to encourage plant biology and rhizophagy through seed inoculation and the use of biological fungicides and pesticides and seed saving. And on a personal recommendation, I recommend the use of organic foods, of getting to know your farmer, because even in the organic food world, just going by a set of standards is different than people who are actively working to create quality and to improve the soil through their growing processes. So to eat foods with many colors, which ensures the phytonutrient content, to only use antimicrobials and antibiotics when it's absolutely necessary for yourself and for your pets, to greatly reduce the amount of seed oils in your life. I can't tell you how much that's going to help you, because most of them are high in omega-6s. So I think the only oils we use are olive oil, avocado oil, and there's one more oil that we use, coconut. In addition to the algae oil that's more used medicinally, avoid and eliminate sweetened beverages, getting rid of sugars, really trying to allow your body to experience glucagon, which will allow you to experience autophagy, which is healing, to practice intermittent fasting. You can start slow, just skip a meal, and then you can work your way up to quite a few more hours. For the past couple of years, I've lived a life where, I eat for like a 3-4 hour period every day. And then I limit what I eat to that time period. And just, I guess the essence of what I want to say is that we really need to be satiated from our lifestyles. We need to cultivate living from the heart. We need to cultivate mindfulness and being less reactive, to learn how to connect our microbiome to the greater microbiome, because we are all one. So walk barefoot, hug a tree, do whatever you can to grow your microbiome and learn to be a witness. So J. Krishnamurti said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And I said this, and Kripalu quoted me, "Why should a circle compare itself to a straight line? Authenticate and experience your oneness." All right, thank you. Any questions?
Hey, Dr. Amen, do you want to stop sharing and we'll put everybody on gallery? And
all right, stop share. Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Do we get college credit?
I hope that was helpful to someone out there.
Amazing. If y'all want to use you can use the raise hand if you want to make even just a reflection, right? A reflection back, or a question or a comment.
So can we trust USDA organic? I mean, I think organic standards have been watered down because the USDA got involved. Before organics was controlled by people like Eden Foods, who were organic purists, old hippies from the 70s, 60s, and 70s, who wanted to set a standard for clean food. And now Walmart and Costco are, the number one providers of organic foods. And, as these big corporations get involved, the standards go lower and lower. And so the reason that we are not certified organic is because of the use of plastics in organics. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we cannot use compostable, biodegradable plastics or mulch, but plastics are commonly used in organics, and they go straight into the landfill and to the oceans. So I don't agree with that. And on principle, I refuse to support the way that they, it's just follow the rules. I think the people who support us know that our standards are beyond organics. So I would say you need to know your farmer and grow as much of your own food as you can.
Amy, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. And it might be more of an appreciation comment. The entire presentation was so good, but I said in the chat, and I'll just, as a reminder, maybe you didn't get to see it. I live right next door, just north of you in Baltimore, which is very close to Johns Hopkins. And I think that we as a community have some blessings and some challenges with them being here. And you really helped add to the narrative that I hear in such an important way. The way that you linked the history of the medical community with food was really important. And as we head into Earth Day, one last comment and an appreciation for your connection to fertilizers and war chemicals specifically, because all of our movements really need to come together. And I think your presentation is powerfully doing that. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
We have time for a couple more questions or just reflections. I know we're probably all still kind of letting all of that incredible information land, and we'll be integrating it for a while, but would love to have some more voices in the space. Oh, Tanisha has a question. She says her mic is acting up. So she's
so I see the question. I would say you want to work with someone. One of the docs who sort of precepted in my office years ago is now a fertility expert. And she tells me that she works with people with infertility, and that intermittent fasting is not ideal at certain times during the cycle and for certain people. So I do think for the most part, most healthy people don't have an issue with intermittent fasting. If you're having intense hormonal fluctuations, I would work with a practitioner who is experienced in this. And the other place where intermittent fasting doesn't really work well is for elders who have issues like Parkinson's and who are already sort of depleted. So I wouldn't recommend it for them and for children who are growing. But for most adults, I think we reach sort of a metabolic state, and where intermittent fasting really gives us the cleanest sources of energy that we can work with, because our brains, the higher faculties, really work well when we live off of fat. It is, the ketones are a cleaner source of energy than sugar. With sugar, it's the dopamine thing. We go up and down, like and we play this game all day long, chasing dopamine and, looking for the fixes. And so it's a way. And the other thing about intermittent fasting is the concept of autophagy, which is the body's ability to heal itself, to allow the body to do the work of healing, which I can't say enough about. Like, we don't believe in ourselves enough. We need to allow nature. This is how we gain faith. We gain faith through through witnessing and experiencing our bodies in a healthy state. You know, we gain faith by experiencing our interconnectedness with our surroundings. I think, you know, the concept of oneness is not just a concept, it's an experience. And so at the core of who I am, that's where I work from. And so it's not a secondhand story. It is an experience. And so that's the place that I really live my life from. And so I encourage people to really, live in a way that they gain faith through their experience. And so intermittent fasting is just one way that we open up to the healing power of nature. Any other questions? You know, the best time of day for fasting, I think according to Chinese medicine, earlier in the day is the best time to eat, when most of our digestive system is working the best. So ideally, it would be sometime from mid-morning to early afternoon. Another way, it doesn't have to be these extreme 4 or 6 hour periods. I think for most of us, if we eat 2 meals a day, leaving a 6 to 8 hour period in between the meals where we can burn off all the glycogen. The reason that most of our kids have fatty liver disease today is because we're constantly eating and we're constantly building up glycogen, and we never experience glucagon, which allows us to break down glycogen, right? So we could look perfectly normal, but have these fatty livers. And so but according to, for me, I eat in the evening just because it's when I can eat with my family. I recommend most people eat earlier. Like if you're going to take a time period, maybe like, 10 to 2 or 11 to 3 or something like that. Or to separate your meals out and eat a meal at 11 and then another meal at, 6 or 7 in the evening. So both those ways, I've seen people lose weight and experience all the benefits of intermittent fasting, eating 1 or 2 meals a day. So, I think you should start off with a way that works for your lifestyle. And once you see the benefits, to increase that based on what you can manage. Any other questions? Anyone who wants to visit our farm, sure, you can just contact us, info@purpletools.net. We're open to having folk out. We're about to plant rice, so you're welcome to come and help us. Well, our rice production is done all by hand. So every year we transplant, about 55,000 plants by hand into the ground. So we could always use a hand. And so, yes. In terms of if we could only grow few foods, I think you should grow what you can. The grain production, is a problem mostly because of processing equipment. I think what we're working on is the Amish, the Mennonites. These people have small scale grain processing equipment. For us, we had to look to Japan, who sort of is a closed economy when it comes to their food system, meaning they still live in a sort of a localized food network. So they have equipment that we've imported that allows us to grow grains and process them in our community. But, you know, this is not a standard in, you know, most of the grains grown in America are grown in the commodity crop system. So I just want to say the role of phytonutrients. So phytonutrients control a lot of the hormones in our body. And so just like when we think about diabetes, you know, we use herbs that are astringent, herbs that sort of close things off. So things like cinnamon and fenugreek and bitter melon and berberine. So in you know, traditional African cultures, they ate this really, really spicy food to combat like malaria, but at the same time, they understood and included bitters, which are cold, which counterbalance taking spiciness. So that spiciness in America would cause us to have hypertension if we ate spicy foods like that all the time, because we don't know how to balance them out with bitters. And so I think there's traditional and indigenous wisdom like this all around the world that we need to pay attention to. But the role of phytochemicals and phytohormones and even the human biome, like people come in here and, you know, we prescribe them these probiotics that they should really be getting from the foods that they eat, because they've, you know, and so how, and that's sort of the importance of fresh foods. And, you know, even the organic foods that we grow, a lot of that stuff is 2 weeks old by the time it hits our plate, and it went through some ripening facility. It was completely green, and then 4 hours later, after it was gassed, it looks completely ripe, but it tastes like nothing. So, you know, all of this means we really need to support a local agricultural system wherever we are. And how much more time do we have? I can't see, but I think that's all I have to say. And I want to thank you all. This has been beautiful. I want to thank Kripalu for allowing me to share. And I hope that you all were able to get something from this. Peace be to everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nazirahk.
All right.
And thank you all for joining us today. So this evening, we'll also be having the How Eco Hip Hop Decolonized the Kitchen Recipes for Resistance with Etef Vita. And so we hope you have a wonderful afternoon integrating all this new information that you've gotten, and we'll see you soon. Be well.